morning. In this video I'm gonna show you lots of footage from Petra taken during my 6-day visit during last winter, which is a kind of unique footage because most of all other video material is from the main street of Petra. It is not very convenient to visit all the other parts of the metropolis, and that's why most of the other images you would see would be mostly from the main street, while there is much more to a city than the main street. Also, I will make an attempt to recover whatever we know about the real history of Petra, which seems to be quite different from the mainstream version. And also I'm gonna give you some practical tips on visiting. And at the end some general updates about my video channel and what kind of ideas I have about future videos. This is actually the second video on Petra from this expedition. Here is the first one. It is on the other channel. It did receive many likes. I think it's worth watching. There seem to be three major architectural styles amongst the ruins of Petra, and this is the first type, the oldest, very eroded rock-cut chambers. I can't find the typical facade to show you from this style because the erosion has eaten up everything. Now this is the second style. There are some facades to show you. The window on the left-hand side upper corner most likely remained from the first wave of building because everything is mixed up in Petra. The newer styles were built on the top of the older ones using the bigger cavities that they inherited, refreshing them with new looks, with new facades. And then the third style is the most recent, that's why we have so relatively well preserved facades, is the Romaic. I avoid the term Roman to avoid this false association in the background of our minds with Rome. Now, the rooms on the left-hand side have faced such severe erosion that only a hint of them has remained. Only the back wall is visible. The chambers on the right side down are somewhat better preserved just because that is their back side. The rooms which were in front, they have all disappeared. While in contrast with all this, the Romaic stuff on the top, not only the facade has remained, but even sharp angles from its decoration are still visible. This particular spot is a fine example of something very important, that the Romaic stuff was built after the older chambers were already very heavily eroded. And another example of this very important point, we have a Romaic arch in front of an older wall. So the erosion of the older wall is practically visibly the same behind the Romaic stuff, where it allegedly stayed 2000 years protected, and around it where it was exposed all the time. Now, how is that possible in the Penguinian fantasy history if the older stuff they call Nabatean tombs, and they were allegedly built merely couple of 100 years before the Romaic stuff? So in couple of 100 years we see such an extreme erosion and almost no erosion on the older wall for 2000 years after that? I think the stories they are telling us are simply a funny joke, and that's only one of the many contradictions that proves it. And as far as the countless relatively simple looking rooms from the oldest layer, which we are told are Nabatean burial places, are in reality nothing close to that. The archaeologists who actually dug some of them out describe multi-leveled apartments with sewage and water supply. The people who built them are described by the penguins as nomads who were struggling to survive in the harsh desert environment. Very simple people. But this is not true at all. For example, the so-called Roman amphitheater at Petra. Even that is a restoration of a huge structure from the older layers. For example, here, the arch in the front is Romaic restoration, but one on the back is rock cut. It has remained from the older layers. The Romaic people simply restored what was already quite a magnificent structure from before. They did not add their Romaic arches to the simple base below. The base was already sophisticated. It is just not easy to notice unless one is really looking for it. It was not built by hillbillies, as the penguins want to assure us. Here again, in the older layers, they embarked on such a massive rock cutting that it borders terra formation. It is on such a scale. If you notice the right angle of the walls in the far background, actually these things are so huge that sometimes it is difficult to film them. They become so small in the faraway distance that sometimes their grandeur cannot be appreciated from a picture. This is not the work of a cattle herding nomads for sure. And speaking of rock-cut amphitheaters, I would like to take you to Sutri in central Italy, where this rock-cut amphitheater is found, one out of the few in the Mediterranean and Asia Minor region. It is very, very similar to the massive rock-cut amphitheater at Petra, and here the penguins are telling us that it is Roman, the only proof of which is this Romaic-looking arch, which, by the way, was added by the restoration teams in the recent years, which they don't even hide in the history of Sutri, but they don't tell it openly to the tourists, so the crowds get the wrong impression. And for those who read the details, for them they have this explanation. Yeah, the amphitheater itself is not like extremely Roman, but they must have hired the local Etruscan workers to do it. That's why it looks non-Roman. So what about the Petra amphitheater? Did the cattle herding tribes also hire the Etruscans to do the design and the job for them? If the Etruscans were commuting daily with their ox carts for thousands of kilometers, that would certainly explain the so-called cart routes the penguins are telling us about. And these inconsistencies in the mainstream history or story that they are telling us about the past of Petra, they are not just details, they are major. They are proving that the basis of all the stories they tell us, it's simply not true. And just one more illustration showing how credible their stories are. These ruins that you see now are found on the peak of Albiara in Petra, and their official dating is to the Edomite period. That's a really big talk. It means it can be even 3,000 years old according to their own dating, the Penguinian dating. Now just notice how sharp are the angles on these stones. They have almost no signs of erosion, and that's on the peak of Albiara, the highest peak in Petra, where the winds are so brazen that when the blasts were coming, I had to lay on the ground not to be carried away like a kite. So they are offering us to believe that in 3,000 years, these relatively small stones did not erode at all, while the Romaic stuff, which by the way was found also right besides them, there was a Romaic structure some 100 meters or 50 meters away, that faced this type of erosion. As you can see, the angles are totally smoothened by time. So all these major discrepancies, I think, prove beyond any doubt that the mainstream history of Petra, and as shown in previous videos of everything else, cannot be trusted even at slightest. That's why at this point I want to tell you what we really know about the history of Petra, no matter how little it is actually. The oldest and most eroded layer was built by the nature people, a civilization for which there is no official name even. The proof of that mainly is the amphitheater and the other architectural elements which are exactly same as those in the rock similar or the same actually rock cut ruins in the Mediterranean region and North Africa and Asia. The official history has not even given us a name of that civilization because they don't want us to even know that they were people of other kind, people completely different than us. Not only they felt the pulse of the elements of nature, but also the nature spirits treated them personally as their children, as their family members. The local communities of spirits or other races, not necessarily spirits, were openly in touch with the human communities in the area. There are a lot of interesting details about the nature people in the books of Jane Roberts for those who are interested. This is a quote for them about what brought about the end, how people started imagining themselves to be separate from nature. Apparently, the Romans, whom I call Romaic people, were still wise enough to see themselves in a proper position. They felt the cosmic pulse of the universe, not like modern men who basically see nature as hostile. They see themselves as being attacked, for example, by malicious viruses, by bad weather. Our bodies are feeble when they are exposed to the natural elements. These actually strange ideas came with the complete reorganization of the planetary culture. Seth mentions two timestamps when it comes to this. First is the end of the Roman Empire, as in this quote, and then whatever was left from the old ways was finished off when the time of the Industrial Revolution came upon us, Seth said. For me, during my 6 day visit, the most amazing thing about this oldest layer of ruins was their sheer volume. As I was walking off the beaten track, I would just see newer and newer hills, hollow with countless rooms. Here it's all ruins. Over there, the broken, huge sarcophagus or whatever. All the hills, ruins, ruins, ruins. And I wonder that small thing here, it's obviously a door or window. I mean, was all this what is now small canyon also ruins? Or there is an access from inside of there as well, small windows. This was huge. Even here we see straight angles from ruins. And when I show you panorama photos, like I just did now, there seem to be places with no ruins, but that's quite deceptive. When you go there, this is what you see. Straight angles, just very small parts of the rooms are left, and when you go near, you clearly see chisel marks. So it is really ruins everywhere. So these suburbs of rock-cut chambers, apartments, they not only continue from what we call Petra all the way to Little Petra. Actually, that is one single city. The two names only signify two places for organizing the tourist flow. Actually, it is kilometers long city. But then other towns, villages, or settlements, again of rock cut ruins, continue all the way to Amman and then all the way to the border of Syria. That's where we reached when we traveled in North Jordan. However, they don't have names. We see them usually when there is a construction, there is lots of earthworks, modern earthworks going in Jordan, and sometimes they uncover such chambers. And I guess they just bury or destroy them. I don't think they give them much attention. So a lot of them simply are unaccounted for, but they are there. We spotted them even without looking for them, just besides the road, and I'm sure there is a lot more deep in the countryside. And what I just said about the rock cut ruins also applies for the Romaic type of ruins. Again, at a number of places, we saw them just like that besides the road, uncovered by construction without name, without any protection. At places, villagers still use them as source of building materials. Yes, even nowadays in Jordan, this is absolutely allowed. However, if you start digging, being curious for historic purposes, this is extremely dangerous. You could be jailed. Somebody warned me he got jailed a few times. So it is allowed to use them as a source of building material, but not allowed to study them. And all this UNESCO protection thing is quite preposterous, I must tell you. All UNESCO does is prevent the archaeologists from actually studying the site. In their own words, mainstream words, only 5% of the city of Petra is excavated. Very interesting, how did they calculate how much is the uncovered part, given in keeping in mind that they have not even excavated the very main street of the city. Even over there, we could be just seeing the second floor only. Probably, not probably, but it's possible that the first floor is completely buried. What to speak of excavating? They have actually added more gravel and buried it even deeper, gravel for making streets for the tourists. And this is the main street. Very, very near to the main tourist entry. It is used not only as a garbage depository, many of the beautiful chambers, not excavated at all, but also as toilets. The amount of Romaic ruins that you see in Rome is maybe only 5% or something like that compared to the hills covered with Roman ruins in Petra and in Jordan in general. It is so much more over there. Built and rebuilt many times, as these pieces of column testify. For example, this was not their original place as part of a wall. Obviously, this is some sort of reconstruction. I can't even imagine how much of history have those Romaic stones have seen. I will not even dare to tackle the Romaic history. In my video about the Roman stories, I showed that there was something similar to what we call Roman Empire, but it wasn't the way we are told it was. Why I cannot even dare to speculate about the true Roman story is that the small pieces of information are so difficult to match together for limited people like us that, well, I'm gonna tell you the pieces that we know for sure, and I hope you will understand me. First of all is this what many would call alien connection, like it was described in the Sumer videos. Different groups of consciousnesses were coming to experience Earth. They were mixing with the original stock already found. They brought their own structures into society, and we know very little about that. About the Sumerians, it is just one out of the many. It is only an example. It is not the main thing, as Seth himself says. So when we put into the cocktail all the other aliens that came and influenced those people and those times, it becomes very complex. Also, put in this cocktail, for example, the information about those sound devices with which the uh, fine carvings at Baalbek were made. Well, more or less, there are many buildings in Jordan. They're geographically very near to Baalbek. They have the same carvings. So it means the people in those Romaic times still had sound devices with which they could melt the surface of the stone and then carve it as they wish. And again, this is just a small example. What else did they have? Then add to all this that probably Jesus Christ was born 1000 years ago. Seth only says that we get his birth time quite wrong, quote, quite wrong. He doesn't say it is 1000 years later than we think, but I this is the closest guess I can make. So add this all to the story, and then it becomes even more difficult to make a sense of it. And then what else to add to this confusing cocktail is all the other histories of various civilizations. For example, I touched the Bogomils, the Qatar Bogomils from France in the survivors. But what about topics that I have not even touched, like the Moors from Africa? They were one of the major links between the people of the old consciousness, as Seth calls them, and us, the limited people. Also, Seth mentions that maybe that type of culture managed to preserve till date in Spain some writings of true scriptures which explain most confidential magical knowledge which could turn us into those superhumans the people were before we were downgraded. So again here, the main point is that people who left behind sometimes ruins that looks simple to us were not necessarily people of simple consciousness. It was a different framework of consciousness. We catch only small fragments that we can't make sense of, and then because actually we're the simple ones, we just say, oh, they were very simple. Now, in this quote, all the quotes are from the set books of Jane Roberts. There is a very interesting point that actually I should have included in the video about the New Age and bringing down the empire of evil. It's about these very interesting incarnational cycles. When the Middle Ages began, a large number of personalities who had lived before and during the Roman period were ready to end their reincarnation cycles. They were the most efficient learners, the wisest, and the most able personalities, and they withdrew their conscious knowledge and memories from your plane. This was one of the reasons for the decay of knowledge and learning in the Middle Ages. There were personalities reincarnated during the Middle Ages who had lived during the Roman experience. However, they were not leading personalities and they were not able to transmit knowledge or abilities from past lives simply because they had not the inherent strength or capability needed. That's quite interesting. When advanced souls withdraw their conscious knowledge and memories from the plane, the society sinks. And here Seth describes how they divorced us from nature. The officials of the Roman Catholic Church altered many records, cleaning them, in their terms, of anything that might suggest pagan practices or nature worship as they thought of it. In terms of your civilization, means us, nature and spirit became divided so that we don't encounter the events of our lives in that context. And thus, divorced from nature, we started living in this small box. Here, Seth gives Nostradamus as an example. Quote, "You may make a note here that Nostradamus saw the dissolution of the Roman Catholic Church as the end of the world. He could not imagine civilization without it, hence many of his later predictions should be read with this in mind." The erosion of the ruins of Petra is very, very spectacular, and it is much more near the ground level, which led me to make some wrong speculations about its origin in the previous video of Petra, which I published years ago. Because of that mistake, now I have deleted that video. It turned out that the reason for such an erosion, which is mostly near the ground level, is very practical and mundane and simple. There was nothing mysterious about it. It works like this. The stone absorbs moisture, water from the ground near ground level, so the nearer to the ground, the more water it absorbs. And when the temperatures drop below freezing, which does happen in these parts of Jordan, sometimes it even snows at Petra, then that frost, the water expands and it breaks down the stone. And the erosion is so spectacular exactly at Petra because the stone there is actually very, very soft. That is why in the regions of the world where people make their houses out of bricks, unlike America where they make it out of other materials, always the portion of the house which is at the ground level is either very well insulated, or different materials are used exactly for that portion of the house which is connected to the ground, because if they put bricks they will absorb the moisture and the house will start falling apart some 1 meter above ground level. Historically, when people would use bricks to make their houses, usually they would make at least 1 meter of the first floor, if not the entire first floor, out of hard stone, which will not absorb water, so that their house doesn't fall apart. And if you travel in the villages of certain regions of Eastern Europe, where there are many abandoned houses, those houses that were built a couple of decades ago, and let's say the people were poor or didn't care and simply put bricks at the ground level, well, their houses in 1 or 2 decades, they're as eroded as Petra, and it looks exactly like that, erosion at ground level only. Years ago, I started this topic of the mysteriously buried buildings, and I'm very happy that it got picked up. Now it is famous under the keyword of mud flood. So it is very nice that people are paying attention and questioning the official history because of the buried buildings. But very often, I think American people who have less experience with houses made out of bricks, I see them showing houses who have that problem with erosion only near ground level, and think that these are examples of houses which have been flooded for a long time or have suffered some sort of terrific floods. And it may look like this for people who have not seen the regions where such houses are abandoned and don't know the reason. But Actually, those are not examples of buildings which have suffered terrific floods. In Petra, the ruins which are on the hilltops have the absolutely same erosion as those which are down in the valleys. It is definitely not flood, because if it was flood, the lower regions would have been covered with the material carried by that flood, and also floods cannot reach the peaks of the mountains. So downtown Petra, the main street itself is 12 kilometers long. 12 kilometers in straight line, given that you don't make any stop, you never go on the side to see any of the ruins inside, because if you want to look at the details, then the distance will be at least double, let's say 25 kilometers, and that's one way. You have to come back also the same day. So actually, having a proper look even at the main street is very difficult, simply because of the transport problems. What to speak of getting an impression of the rest of the metropolis, which is rather large. Unfortunately, the Jordanian government, in its endeavor to provide cash flow for the locals, have simply made it impossible for 99% of the people to properly see Petra. I was there myself 6 days, walked an average of, let's say, 10 kilometers every single day, and still I could not see everything. If I would have used the only transport which is officially allowed there for tourists, then I would have needed, let's say, at least 500 euro per day, just for that, on the top of the whatever 70 euro ticket. Local Bedouin tribes still live in the vast metropolis of Petra. They drive their cars, but foreigners are not allowed to enter by cars, and the locals are forbidden to provide car services for them. Only donkeys, horses, and camels and mules are allowed, and that is at prices which are above the budget of middle class people, except the very first segment from the main entry to the beginning of the sick, because the prices there are fixed. It is also impossible, let's say, to bargain with somebody and to, for example, rent a horse or mule for a day and go wherever you like, because the government has divided Petra into different parts and has allotted them to various tribes to milk the tourists. And one tribe cannot go in the territory of the other one, otherwise they will start fighting. So as you pass through these different territories, you have to hire different animals. Also, there is no guarantee that if you pay for a given service, they will actually provide it. They do sometimes just take the money and leave you to fend for yourself, which is not at all normal for Jordanians. They are very decent and traditional and God-fearing people. However, the lack of government control around Petra has gathered this type of crowd over there. Sometimes the view to the ruins on the main street is obscured by too many shaggy shops selling Chinese souvenirs. And each and every vendor of these shops goes back home every day with at least 100 or 200 euro profit in the pocket. And keeping in mind that the prices of goods in Jordan in general is lower than America or Europe, you would expect, with few people in the family earning like this, You would expect them to have decent lives, but instead, despite their excellent income, they live in utter poverty, like really utter and bottom rock poverty. My guess is that by the end of the day, the cash is being vacuumed clean by the vendors of firewater. In general, visiting the ruins in the periphery, in the outskirts of Petra, is far more enjoyable, and that's where you can feel the spirit of the older times, because usually it's not at all crowded. I was there during the period of the New Year, the least crowded period, and very often I was just alone in the area. I don't know how is it when it gets warmer and big crowds come. But it was actually not the crowds the main problem. Uh, the main thing is that those vendors which sell Chinese souvenirs, they also use the ruins on the main street of Petra as toilets. Despite the large crowds visiting Petra, tourism, the industry is still very poorly developed in Jordan. Even basic things like most hotels don't even clean or change sheets after customers. For example, somebody might have been chewing on a chicken a couple of months ago, and the mummified remains of the chicken would be still behind the bed. Or let's say the Ministry of Tourism is selling you tickets, combined tickets to visit various historic sites and save, pay less. However, they on the website where they sell them, nothing else besides the payment gateway functions. The pictures of the sites are actually mixed up. They do not correspond to the name of the site. Also, there is no map, so mostly people don't even know where are the minor sites which are included in the ticket. And in addition, one cannot find information or the location of a given site just by doing a search with its name, because there are no results. And probably the site I'm talking about actually exists, but the problem is that there is no standard naming system in Jordan, which confuses all maps, because the same site might be listed under 5 or 7 different names, an attempt to transcribe the local Arabic pronunciation. And since there is no actual way to find out what are the other ways to write the name of this site, basically one cannot find anything about it. Or even if we know the names, even if one finds out the names, there are other scenarios. For example, there was one site with many names. I figured them all out, and I saw many pictures of this site, but the problem is that on various maps it was different places, which are like many kilometers away. Actually, mapping is so confused in Jordan that it's really hard to believe. Even the world famous Karak Castle, which is not a minor attraction, is pinned on completely different locations, different cities, on various major map providers. Or another example, some tourists travel by taxi and they pay uh, expensive taxi fare to arrive to the site of Little Petra, which is officially listed as a free entry site, just to be stopped at the gate by some not authorized looking personnel who send them to buy tickets 10 kilometers away from the entry. So Petra is vast, it is not fenced. It's too big to be fenced, but still there are 3 main entrances so to say. Of course, the locals know countless other ways, but for the tourists, there are more or less three. The main one, where 95% of the crowds enter from, is right on the main street, but the problem is, of course, too crowded and also the hygiene. As soon as you enter, after the neat and clean payment center, you end up in a tourist park with mountains of garbage. There is one more entry which is accessible by car, and that is the best one. If you have a car that is on the side, you enter from a Bedouin village. That one is very clean and is somewhat nearer. You need to walk a bit less if you want to see the ruins in the center, so to say. The third one is actually very nice. They have built it very nicely. It is the entry itself is not accessible by car. We had to hire a local person with a four-wheel drive, but it was totally worth it. We were absolutely the only people on the entire walk, and it took us direct to the monastery, so that we did not have to walk all those 12 kilometers uphill to reach the monastery. So it was very nice. We could sit and then descend downhill from there. There weren't that many ruins before we could see the monastery itself, but the mountain views were definitely worth the walk. There are a lot of spectacular ruins which are outside the main street, downtown ancient Petra. The ones which impressed me most were, first of all, the gigantic via cavas and passages, broad boulevards cut many meters deep in the rock, and then the lion statue and the two pyramids. It may look like an elephant in the beginning, but actually what looks like a trunk is one of the paws of the lion, and the quadratic window-like cut on the top, that's where actually they would insert the separately made head of the statues. I've noticed they use this technique also at other places in Petra. That's how they would attach the statues to the bedrock or the wall. And these are the two somewhat irregular pyramids. And to sum up my impressions from Petra, the contrast between the sophistication and the skills, their appreciation and style of art, and their ability to carry out grand projects, it cannot be even compared in any way with the capacity of the modern population of the place now. And while the rest of the footage from Petra is on the screen, I would like to take it as an opportunity to tell you more about how has it been going on with me and with the NewEarth channel. A couple of months ago I told you about this experiment with the other channel which I made, NewEarth by Sylvie Ivanova. I was hoping that at least that one will not be affected by this type of discrimination, or I don't know what is it exactly, censorship, something of that sort. The problem was and still is that while my videos are shown, videos from other channels relevant are recommended on the right hand side, on the right side of the screen. So many people click on those links and find other related channels. So they show other channels besides my video, but they do not show videos from my channel when they show videos on other channels. They don't recommend my videos, and that's why the people have no way to find out about my work. And I'm talking about being removed from the recommended videos on other channel, not on my own. So I created this other channel, and unfortunately the situation with it is absolutely the same problem. They use my work to recommend the work of other people, but they do not recommend my work when they show other videos, and that's exactly what they openly said last summer when this problem started, that they will no longer recommend videos which are not in coherence with the widely accepted scientific version of reality. That's what they said, and that's what they did. So for now, I'm simply gonna stop posting on that other channel and continue on this one only. The secondary channel, I believe it's called Ancient Earth. That one will continue to function for videos which are of less importance. So a couple of months ago I decided to do only one video on history per month, and the rest would be on ayahuasca and spirituality. That was my intention, and unfortunately I'm unable to fulfill it because there have been lots of changes in my life exactly at the time I made that decision, and it is getting even more difficult with time on my side for a number of reasons. So I am not making videos on ayahuasca and spirituality yet, not because of the censorship, but because of the lack of time. I was making one painting for an event, and now that is ready. So hopefully I will have more time for videos. Some ideas about what those videos could be. Maybe I could start reading again translations of the Puranas and other Vedic texts and make them into a more like easy to understand for the Western people video form, maybe with some illustrations, maybe from my paintings. What I showed you was, of course, the Divine Mother Ayahuasca. Ideally, it would be nice to study in parallel the Indian Vedas and the Slavic Vedas. Of course, these are brave plans considering the amount of time I have and the ideas of learning that I'm having recently. And again, I'm amazed how magical is the universe and how perfect all this karma thing works, how events are planned to match so many things. When this new period, very, very new period in my life started, May this year, at that time I also had personal experiences which made me at least starting to wrap my mind around something in which I theoretically believed before but could have never imagined how it works in reality, namely that all historic moments exist at the same time. So now that I start gaining some practical understanding of how this can function, although it is against our ideas of reality and time, exactly now, the period in which I've been making lots of historic videos is over. And this is so gracefully aligned with everything, because if my understanding wasn't so limited a couple of years ago, I could have not made those videos and put so much energy behind this project of trying to recover the real history if I knew that actually there can be even different histories, different timelines. I believed in that theoretically, but because it was so far away from my practical understanding, I did not take it so much into consideration. Now that I understand actually how important that is, I would not invest my energy in such pursuits anymore, which also has a negative side. In one sense, negative, of course, is very relative. Now I can no longer make historic videos which will be appreciated by most people, which will cater to their understanding and view of the world. Maybe what I'll make now in terms of historic videos will be more correct, but what's the use of it when people will not appreciate them that much? They will sound too strange. It is not that my approach or findings were all wrong. I was just not aware about what tiny percentage of the entire spectrum of the reality affected by history they cover. And when I said that now I would not invest so much energy in this type of investigations, doesn't mean that I'm not gonna investigate history. However, I will be within this broader perspective of the various civilizations and events existing in various timelines simultaneously, and all the historic moments again being always in the present now, again simultaneously, and sometimes even interacting between each other. That is, of course, a very difficult task, and luckily I've got a few years to come up with results, because I already have video material from previous expeditions for videos for a couple of years, and hopefully again the timing will be perfect, and by the time I publish what I have, there will be more revelation from the mystic side of the history. You can enjoy the rest of the Petra footage with the background music. I wish you a nice day. Do something nice for your soul today, something beautiful.
Oynatırsam son dünyayı ay, şonak eken ay, adam degen bol dünyege konak eken ay, arman ay, öttüm dünya oy jangan ay, arman ay, öttüm dünya oy jangan ay. Kızgaldakтай ойғалап барған, қайра жастығай, қара жерге ой қар жаумай, солады екен ай, арман ай, öttüm dünya oy jangan ay, arman